Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
I'm Bill Dries with the Daily Memphian. We are talking with Linda Harris, a candidate for District Attorney General in the May Shelby County Democratic primary election, and this is on the record. We record this Monday, March 21st, 2022. This is one of three on the record podcasts with the three candidates for District Attorney General and the Democratic primary featured in our comprehensive story about this primary race. The winner of the primary will meet Republican incumbent District Attorney Amy Wyrick in the August county general election. Wyrick is unopposed in the May Republican primary. So, Linda, you are a former federal prosecutor, a former Memphis police officer, and in your private law practice, you currently work as a family law mediator with a special designation for your work in domestic violence. Let's start with what's at stake here that all three of the contenders in this primary have talked about and agree on: change in the district attorney's office. Why do you feel change is necessary in that office?
Okay, can I just go back 1 second? So it's not
Sure.
just limited to family law. I
Okay.
am a general civil, which means it includes civil rights violations and other things that I mediate. So
Okay.
I just wanted to correct that.
Great. Okay. All right. So the talk about change in the district attorney's office. Tell me why you feel like the office has to change in this election.
Well, I think there is a record that's not only here in Memphis, but from a national perspective of issues that exist that are unjust in our system. And these are not issues that we just became aware of. It's just that there's a move all over the United States to reform the criminal justice system and to make it just that, just. So that is so important and so crucial. And I know that I have the experience to do that. I'm not, I didn't just serve as a prosecutor. I was a veteran prosecutor for a number of years and worked on a number of crime reduction strategies and law enforcement strategies. So I bring all of that experience with me to the office. But that's the safety factor, right? And then there is the justice factor for those offenders who are in the system. And not just for the offenders, but, I've had so much conversation with so many different people in this community. I have connected with the community. And it is from the perspective of both victims, from the perspective of offenders, from the perspective of just John Q. Citizen, who's out here every day and seeing the issues that are affecting them on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. So is this a sweeping change in the office that is felt on the day you take office if you win the primary and then the general election?
Yes. So when we talk about sweeping change, what does that mean? I don't know. It is a move towards a better system. So I am a restorative practices. I'm trained by the International Institute for Restorative Practices. So it is from day one an office that moves towards implementing those types of reforms in a system. There are some things that we know must end on day one, which, not according to Linda Harris, but according to the United States Department of Justice, there is some racial disparity in our system. Those types of things will change. And, there is a push all over for youth justice reform. And how do we do that? And how do we do it in a rational, safe manner for both the youth who are involved and our community, right? Because whether we like it or not, people, I think, generally are resistant to change. And it's not so much resistance that they're afraid of change. And when you start talking about, oh, I'm going to do this, and from day one, people begin to maybe even get pushback before you're elected. So yes, we're going to, from day one, we will continue to hold violent offenders accountable. However, we will begin to increase health and drug alcohol abuse screenings because we have a lot of issues with that in our community. And we're going to increase the referrals for treatment for people because what we have, Bill, quite frankly, is a lot of patterns. And because of my experience, I can look at a particular pattern of individuals. A lot of the violence that we have in our community, it escalates, right? And before something really, really tragic happens, I would say in 99% of the cases, there are some signs, there are some issues, and that person has been had some contact, more likely than not, with the criminal justice system at some point before this really tragic thing happens. And what are we doing for that individual and for our communities before we reach that elevated stage?
Mm-hmm. So much of the discussion locally about crime and punishment has gone something like this: lock up the repeat violent offenders and offer alternatives to prison for nonviolent offenders. And it's said so often that it leaves me wondering, are there two types of criminals? Are there violent and nonviolent criminals, and they don't cross over, or you don't have a nonviolent offender who might be in court for a nonviolent offense who has done something violent in the past? I mean, is it as simple as violent and nonviolent?
No, I don't think it's that simple. I think what we're speaking about in a lot of instances, particularly I can't speak for others. I can speak for Linda Harris. Mm-hmm. So under the restorative practices, or some people know it as restorative justice, there are a lot of things you can do, let's say, with property crimes. So we're talking here alternative, maybe in those instances, we're talking misdemeanor offenses that don't even indicate that there might be any violence involved. And that's not to say that property crimes are not important, because they are. And I know many, many years ago, I was the victim of a burglary, and you feel violated, when your things are taken from you. But I think that's when we're talking about low-level crime and whether or not there are violent offenders, nonviolent offenders, it's going to depend on the circumstances. It's going to depend on the underlying offense initially. So is it a theft? Are we talking theft here? What is the record of the person? Has the person had any prior offenses? I think it's a number of factors that you're looking at. But what's happening, and I think what the public sees, is that we spend too much time on offenses, and people are being incarcerated for offenses that do not reflect justice. For example, in the latest one would be the Pamela Moses case. I mean, we look at that particular case. I know that there were some issues maybe years ago with some things that she had done, and people might say that those were showing a propensity to become violent, but there was no one actually hurt. And this was a voting case, and she gets 6 years, right? Mm-hmm. Incarceration. Is that just? That's what I think that's what I'm talking about when we're talking about alternatives to sentencing. What is the offense that we're locking people up for? Because it's showing that when we do that, what are we really accomplishing? Will she be reformed? Will she be rehabilitated? Or will she just be punished? And I think so often we look at the what someone does versus the why they do it. And we have to, if we want to be effective with resolving crime, look at the why. So I think it is screening, more screening of cases, making a holistic determination about the individual and not an across the board application of anything. I think that's where we make the mistake in the criminal justice system. And I think we're not proactive. So that's what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about alternatives to sentencing, we're talking about maybe there might be a marijuana offense, for example. Will we lock that person up? Or is there something else we can do to help that individual? Is there something that society would be better served by than locking that person up? And there are a number of factors. You have to make an assessment as to the individual. And that's where I think we have to start.
All
right? With the screening of the cases.
Okay. You talked about the Justice Department findings when it came to juvenile court, specifically in 2012 when the county and the court entered into an agreement with the Justice Department for monitoring, more specific monitoring over a number of years that was discontinued during the Trump administration. And the issue, the role that the district attorney's office plays in this, of course, one of the roles is the decision by prosecutors on whether a child should be charged as an adult, and then juvenile court makes a decision about whether or not to grant that transfer for trial as an adult. If you're elected, how do you see that process changing on the district attorney's end of this?
Well, there are a number of jurisdictions in the United States that have implemented restorative justice reform. And those that have, particularly in the area of youth justice, they're showing that overall in the United States, I think there's 45 cities or states that are using it. There's been a reduction in recidivism overall from 27% to 18%. So those are children who are not being transferred, because when we look at why we transfer children, there are statutory factors. But the most important thing is, can the youth be rehabilitated? And there's not enough focus on that. I think it has to be a holistic approach. And so when we're talking about youth, because we try to stay away from that term. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about the youth justice system, we have to approach it from a holistic perspective. So there would be less transfers. Let me put it that way, because I believe overall our youth can be rehabilitated. When I was a police officer, we didn't have the transfer of young people to adult court. So that's something that evolved subsequent to my leaving the police department. I don't know what year it was implemented, but that hasn't always been the case. So when we're evaluating our children, what are the underlying factors that are causing any given particular child to commit a crime? And I think that the criminal justice system views some kids as just bad. And when they view kids as bad, they're treated badly, versus viewing children as troubled, as disobedient, as unruly. Those are terms, but they mean something. And, exploring why. Is it something with this child? And as I said, we need to treat our children not generally, but assess our children individually as to whether or not in any given case with any given child, what are the underlying factors that are affecting this behavior? And approaching it from a teen concept, because, part of this restorative practices is not just limited to the criminal justice system. It's totally community oriented.
Mm-hmm.
It's similar to what Janet Reno did with her weed and seed years ago, the seeding aspect of it. So it's more than just working with the juvenile or the youth. I'm sorry, the youth. It is it's working with the community, being proactive in that area, right? So that's with the schools, with the churches, with the many nonprofit organizations that we have. We have a number of organizations that have already done a lot of work with our kids. Stand for Children would be one, but I can assure you that I had an opportunity to participate with Drive the Dream, and there are so many untapped resources available that we don't really know about that are available to help us turn things around in our community holistically.
Yeah, and I also so often when you have a specific case where the youth is going to be charged as an adult, the argument that is made is that the public has to be protected from someone who is accused of a very serious offense. In some cases, murder. In some cases, robbery. Something like that. What do you say? And how would the office under your leadership go about protecting the public, as well as considering all of the factors in this child's background that you talked about?
So I didn't talk about a particular child. And so I go back to the fact that each child has to be considered as an individual. And there would be a number of factors. What else, had that child done? What else is going on in that child's life? But I talked about the statistical data as it relates to the restorative issues as it affects the offender. Under the program that I am speaking of, overall, if I remember my statistical data correctly, there is an 89% satisfaction rate overall with victims. So this is if implemented properly, this is a way to deal with it where both our victims and the offender are satisfied with the results. And one of those is through victor offender mediation. That's just one aspect of it, but that seems to be working well. And when I say that's just one aspect of it, trust me, that's only one. I'm throwing that one out as an example, because a number of victims feel that they don't get the communication and the assistance that they're looking for or in need of. They do think sometimes that too much emphasis is put on the offender and not enough on them. When we're talking about the community safety aspect of it, that aspect of the Janet Reno initiative was proactive. And it brings in the community before the offenses occur. So we have to back up, and we are where we are. So first, there's an assessment of where we are. There's an assessment of where we want to be 1 year from now, and an assessment of where we want to be 5 years from now. There's going to be a transition period. And during that transition period, everyone may not be happy, but we will not be allowing someone to get out who we think would harm the citizens in society. When we're talking about doing mental health and drug abuse screenings, if we have identified some issues, what is it that we can do for the offender to assure we can, A, help the offender be a productive individual and protect society at the same time, protect our community, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
But what happens, Bill, is that there are signs. What's happening now is that there are signs that people have these underlying issues and nothing is done until people are hurt. And then there's this outcry about we're not safe. And what I'm saying is you have to turn that around. And I can give you a great example, and this is not a juvenile, but there was a guy who in 2011, he and a girlfriend, they beat a woman and cut her with box cutters. In 2013, he shot at a woman with her children in the car. I think in 2013, he also shot a woman 4 times and killed a baby. In 2015, he was charged with rape and kidnapping. And then last year, he killed his girlfriend and drove her to the precinct. So what could have been done much longer before we get to the point where now we have another woman dead, and she leaves 7 children. So when the community talks about safety, we need to deal with the issues early on. And that's what will happen under a Linda Harris administration, identifying whether or not there's some pattern going on with that individual. Even that individual, can he be rehabilitated? Mm-hmm. We don't wait until he kills the 5th person, but the signs are there. But that's what's happening. And when I'm talking about being proactive, could that have been dealt with differently through mental health screening? Is there some why this person was doing it? And that's what we don't look at, the whys.
Let's talk about the overall role of the district attorney's office and the public's perception of that. Do you think the public sees the district attorney as one side of two in a battle between zealous advocates, one side making the best case for guilt and the other making the best case for acquittal? That sounds and probably is pretty simplistic, but I think that's how at least some of us view what goes into electing a district attorney, that we're electing one side in a matchup in court.
Yeah, and that goes back to Janet Reno's administration. I mean, so you're right. I think you're right. I think that's how the public perception of it is. But it is so much more than that. So if we look at the American Bar Association guidelines, the role of the district attorney is to seek justice in the community. And that office has a great deal of discretion on how certain grant funds might be distributed and what's in the best interest for public safety, right? So if we're going to be effective, then the role of the district attorney general's office must not be one where we're just seeking convictions and we're just here to put someone in jail, because that's not working. And what ends up happening when we're doing it this way is when people are released, they come back in a number of instances worse than when they went in. And we have got to change that. That's what this reform is all about. How do we change those things? And I think it is through community outreach, through increased community collaboration. And when we're talking about not just doing that, one of the things we're going to do is, and I think everyone else has mentioned this, is a conviction review unit to make sure that we're not just doing that we're not just putting people in jail, and particularly some who may have been wrongfully convicted, because we know we're hearing instances of that every day, just about.
And yet, District Attorney General Wyrick has been asked about such a unit several times, and her response has been that her office continually reviews that's a normal function of the district attorney's office. What do you say to that?
I say that based on, I told you I'm connected to the community, and I have had a number of conversations, and there are some documented cases where people have made some pretty serious allegations about their convictions and what has happened. And if you're not going back to reevaluate that, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even as a prosecutor for 15 years with the Department of Justice, I was always willing to listen to an attorney who might bring their client in to explain some things which are circumstantial, which if you probe more into it, it could be that person is innocent or not, not guilty of that crime. And so if you're not doing that, then you don't have a true conviction review unit. You really don't, because we know, for example, in New York in 2015, as a result of their criminal review unit, they found that 20 people had wrongly spent a total of 435 years in prison. We just found out that the individuals who were convicted 55 years ago of assassinating Malcolm X were exonerated. Every day we're hearing about people who are on death row and are cleared through DNA evidence. So if you're not doing that, then you don't have a true conviction review unit. And I don't see the current District Attorney General's office doing that. I see the current District Attorney General's office taking a strong stance against, for example, in the Purvis Payne case, the DNA testing. So if you are so convinced that the person is good for it, then why not? Why not allow those types of tests to occur? Because if you're correct, then that's a solid conviction. But if you're wrong, then you've got someone on death row who shouldn't be on death row. That's not what's happening there. So that's wrong.
All right. That's where we will leave the conversation for now. As always, our coverage of this election year continues in the Daily Memphian. We have been talking with Linda Harris, a candidate in the May Democratic primary for District Attorney General. This is one of 3 podcast interviews with each one of the 3 contenders in the Democratic primary. I'm Bill Dries, and this has been On the Record.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.